Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and happy Hanukkah! Tonight we are going to do some resist dyeing and layering color techniques to create a variegated colorway that will have patches of pops of bright colors and then patches of darker colors. And we're going to achieve this using zip ties, reusable zip ties as the resist. And I am so excited because I absolutely love this technique. We are going to start off using one of my new favorite tools, the 5-gallon bucket. This is large enough that I can easily dye 900 grams of yarn with minimal problem. Even in my big 12-quart pot, 9 skeins would be fairly crowded. And so this, while I'll still have some tonal variation in here, it'll allow me to get more coverage of our first color, which is ultimately what I want. I pre-soaked our 9 skeins of platinum sock and platinum DK in some plain tap water overnight so they can be nice and wet and ready to go. I have already added on my favorite removable nylon zip ties, which will be making a big appearance throughout this video because later on this is what we will use to add the resist points to the yarn. But again, I'm not doing any resists yet. I want to start off with an all over bright blue using my favorite blue ever. I wanted to pop back in for a quick note. I film all of these ChemKnits Chanukah special videos months in advance, and also I film them out of order. And so I know that the first time I set up a cool vat in this 5-gallon bucket like this will be coming up in a subsequent night later on in this series. So I just wanted to point that out in case there's any confusion from me talking about how much I love this technique and how I should have been doing it more all along. What is my favorite blue? Why, that is Dharma Frozen. This blue is almost electric. I absolutely love it. And my plan is to measure out 9 grams of this dye, dissolve it in an unspecified amount of water, so that way we can get an approximately 1% depth of shade as a starting point on our yarn. And then we'll layer on other colors with our resist added. While I am dealing with the dry dye powder, I am wearing a respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves. I do have a blog post on different sources for respirator masks, since the one that I personally use has been out of stock a lot recently, and I will have that linked down in the video description. In the video description, you'll always find all kinds of really helpful links, so it is always worth checking out. I try to include as much of my favorite tools and materials as I can down there. While I was mixing the dye, and I got a little over 9 grams, but you can see why Frozen is my favorite color. This is actually the first of the 2-ounce Dharma dye containers that I have completely used up. So I think that if there's anything that indicates it is a much loved color, that is it. I'm gonna go rinse this with some water and come pour it into the bucket. I don't mind that I got a little over 9 grams. That additional 0.2 grams of dye isn't gonna make a huge difference for our final colorway, especially since we're dyeing by feel. Now I'm gonna remove this yarn from the Presoak, and not really worrying about squeezing it out, adding it to our cool, oh, check out that color, our cool dye bath. I am moving the yarn in and out, moving it around a bit. I don't mind if we end up with a tonal. I don't mind if there's white patches. When we add on our resists, we will be able to control and pick where we place our resists on the yarn. And so that will give us some more control then. I will come and add acid in a moment, but by waiting to add acid, this at least allows us the chance to get the dye distributed through the fiber a little bit, and especially if I separate these skeins a little bit from areas where, you know, they might be stuck together, to give it a little bit more movement and range. But now I'm going to go get some vinegar to add to the bucket. And now I'm going to add 300 milliliters of white vinegar, which is approximately 1 cup. And I don't know if you just saw that shift that I did, and I've probably mentioned this before with this color, but all of a sudden the dye shifted and looked a lot more turquoise in the bath. The color on the actual yarn doesn't look different to me, but that was just an interesting change. And I'm stirring this, attempting not to splash, by raising and lowering the yarn. And again, maybe now I'm going to lower them back in one at a time, so that way they are not clumped together. Now, I could come and stir this more throughout the process if I wanted the color more even, but as I mentioned, that isn't something that is super important to me. And now I am going to cover the bucket and let it sit outside for a couple of days or until all the color has absorbed. I am finding cool vat techniques like this to be extraordinarily useful as a small batch dyer who works out of their kitchen. This means that my stovetop is now not covered with 2 kettles trying to dye this for that first round and then waiting for it to cool so I can add the resists. Instead, I can wait more time. I can set this up, leave it, wait more time, and then after a couple of days when I go and check and all the dye is absorbed, I can start right in adding the resists and doing the next round either hot in the pot, or we could potentially add hot water to one of those buckets. Maybe not recommended, but either way, it means that the time scale where I'm actively working on this yarn is reduced, and it allows me to work on more projects at once. This is particularly useful if you've had big interruptions to childcare or school or something like that. So the amount of time that you have at your stove for dyeing has been reduced. So when you know that you want to do a multi-step process, sometimes breaking it up over the course of multiple days can be really helpful and allow you to dye more yarn than you might have been able to otherwise. 9 skeins is definitely the most I've ever done with this technique, but I feel like these bins could fit a lot more. So that is a really, really useful thing to use. The only thing I wish is that my 5-gallon buckets were white rather than dark blue, so that way it would be easier to tell the color in there and when the color has all absorbed, but you will be able to see from the runoff when you check on the skeins if there is still color that hasn't bound yet. But again, since we're going to be over dyeing this in other techniques, if there is some dye that hasn't yet bound, that's not as important because we will be heat setting and dyeing this multiple times going forward anyway. It is now a few days later. I did check in on the yarn after about a day, and oh my gosh, it's warm. It is very hot today. I did check in on it once. I'm trying to get all of the yarn. This is why these zip ties come in handy. 3, 6, 9. Okay, let's pull it up. And that runoff is completely clear. All of our initial color is in this yarn. I'm actually going to go get a container to put this in. And what I'm going to do for each of them is I will squeeze out most of the liquid to bring it inside so we can come bring the resists. And I do think the colors are a bit blown out now on camera, so they are more saturated than what I'm seeing on my camera. But let's go inside and start adding some resists. I am adding a 10th skein to our mix. This is just a bare skein that I dunked in that same bucket, not for long enough to be a pre-soak, so it's not as saturated as the others, but it is wet and has that same amount of vinegar on it. And I thought it would be interesting to then have this so that way we could see the variation of color that we get if we did not include the blue skein at first, and see how much of the white maybe will be left behind. So I'll treat this skein similar to the rest. This first round we did in a very measured way in terms of the amount of color that we added. The next round is going to be more by feel. I have this leftover stock solution of, I believe it is Dharma Teal. This was from a live stream a month or two ago, and I want to use this to add some subtle dimension into this base color. So what we're about to do is add a round of resists to this yarn, over dye it with the teal, and then we're going to take everything out, add more resists, and then over dye it with the deeper, more saturated forest green for a final layer of color on our yarn. There are going to be differences on all of these skeins, but the goal for this round is to have a selection that is 3 times the length of the skein in our resist. And so this was done unevenly throughout, but that is the plan, I guess, for this stage. The color coverage I got on these blue skeins is really nice, actually. It is fairly even, and I am very happy. It doesn't matter how neatly I do this. I'm just going through and adding a single resist to each. But again, if I have 1, 2 layers, I'm moving it to add that third before we come through and add this resist in here. And what the resist is going to do is limit the color that can go into this whole region right here. And you can see we do have some lighter patches on our yarn as well. I think for this next round, now that we have 10 skeins total, we'll do them in batches of 5. And I think the next round we might even connect some of these skeins together, which I think will be fun. So I'm going to carry on and add these resists off camera to the rest of these skeins. All right, I am now going to place 5 of these skeins, and there's not a lot of resist patches that we added, but there's going to be resists from our pot. I'm going to add 5 in, and I'm doing this in a way such that our resists that we just added are at the top of the pot. My thought being that as I pour liquid and dye over this, we will get uneven coverage on the yarn, but we will absolutely preserve some blue throughout. And so that is my plan. Now for consistency, whatever dye I add to this cup and pour onto this yarn, I'm going to aliquot the same amount of dye for the second batch. So even though right here we have a random mixture and volume of this color, we will be able to maintain some consistency between the 2 batches. And in fact, there's just a tiny bit of color left. So I started with a 1/4 cup, which is about 60 milliliters. And let's see, there is not even a whole tablespoon left. So I'm actually going to just save that color, set it aside, and well, we'll see how far this takes us. But I'm now going to go fill this container so we have a full liter of water here. Now this color doesn't have any other acid in it yet, and we're not going to be distributing it the most evenly over the yarn, but I'm going to start by pouring it semi-evenly over this resist point. And maybe you can see that the color, while it does make a difference on the yarn, is really, really subtle in the difference we're going to get on the blue. And that is my goal, for there to be just a subtle additional tonal element in here. All right, so I did that, and now I'm going to add it to the outside. Now, the way things are laid out, some yarn will get more access to this color than others, and that's just the way that it is, but we know at least all of them got some. So now I'm going to add water until all the yarn is covered, but the pot is still somewhat crowded. I haven't added any additional acid in here yet, but you can get a sense from even just looking at our white skein, the unevenness from the way we applied this color. And now I can sort of point out that resist comes in multiple forms. We have resist from our zip ties, but there's another layer of resist in the crowded way we put all of the yarn in the pot. And ooh, look, and we still see some bright blue and some teal, but by doing this we knew we would preserve some of that teal color. As we start to heat things up, I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, and 4 tablespoons of white vinegar. I'm really excited we have that white skein in here, so that way we can see how this process, it'll give us a better example of how we have some subtle variation of color from the way we added that teal on. Ooh, I really want to pick it up, but I am refraining. Again, the goal of this stage was to be more subtle. And so next, once we've had a chance to heat this, and I think I'll heat it for about 30 minutes, we'll let it cool, add more zip ties, and then in a less crowded pot, add a darker color over the whole thing. And I'm very excited about that. All right, the 30 minutes is up, and I'm now going to quickly lift this and see, but I'm expecting, yep, all the color is absorbed. So I'm now gonna set this aside, and then we can get set for round 2. Or I guess round 3. I'm really not sure that you guys can see the difference on the blue. You can see a little bit of darker here. There's some more teal and more blue in patches. But over here, we're gonna have some of that teal, but if you open it up a little bit, there'll be some patches of that blue conserved. But there will be some more differences introduced into all this, both in the way the yarn is crowded in the pot and the way that all of these skeins come together for the next rounds of resist. And even though we were consistent with how we applied this first resist that we know will remain blue, I am going to make some effort to conserve some of these teal and maybe white, I guess that's white, to conserve some of these teal patches as I go and add more resists onto 5 skeins of yarn that we will dye all in this pot. So I think I'm actually going to start with one right about here. And we're going to connect these skeins together, which is going to allow us to have larger, tighter resists that will give bigger patches, and not all the places have similar sized sections of this teal. For example, this skein has a short section. This one, it is longer, but I'm gonna go and attempt to tighten and preserve some on both. And then here, and again, there will be some difference between them. I'm going in a bit more randomly to connect and just preserve color between these skeins. But there will also be some crowded nature in here just based on the way that we put things together. And now I'm going through just half of 2. That's been twice, that's been once. Let's do this one. You know, some might have more than others. This is a lot more random and by feel, but you could do this in a more regular way that would give you more consistent results. But I am enjoying the fun of sort of randomly going about this. Maybe This guy seems lonely. Yeah, I sort of lost track of all these different connections, but we now have our yarn in a pan such in a way that we can add some more color into this random resist type situation. Again, I want to reiterate that we could do this in a much more ordered way, but I thought that this will just be nice and fun. And now we can make a decision if we want to layer this with 2 different colors or just 1 color. And ooh, I'm debating. I think that I might get prepared with both forest green and potentially some navy to go over this, but we'll see. But we'll see how things sort of evolve as we start adding color. But now, yeah, let's go get set up. I measured out 3 grams, well 6 grams total, but 3 grams and 3 grams of forest green for our final layer. And now I'm gonna go get these dissolved. I'm not gonna worry about the volume because I intend to add the total amount of dye of each of these colors to a set of 5. So to 500 grams of yarn, we're going to add 3 grams of the forest green dye to start with. The dye is in solution and now my mask is off. And so let's go get ready for round 3 of dyeing. The first thing I want to do is cover this, not with a ton of water. I'm not going to measure the volume, but I want most of this to be within the surface of the water. The pan, and this is a 4-inch deep full-size catering steam pan. You can find things linked in the video description. It is about half full. There's plenty of water if I press down the yarn. The temperature in here varies from still slightly warm from the yarn, and maybe the tap water was warm at first, to just regular cool tap water. So I am going to move things around, but my goal is to have the yarn, it's crowded, but it's also a bit spread out. The heat is still not on. I've got about half of the aliquot, so about 1.5 grams of dye in here. And I just want to show the depth of color and that the tone of this even light is a bit different from this teal. And I'm going to start pouring this on and working it through the pan with my fingers. Now, there's still going to be area here where we're not going to have coverage. There might be areas within these resist areas. There could be areas in the pan that have more and less access to the dye because it is relatively crowded. I don't think I've done 500 grams of yarn in one pot before, but the difference is I am moving things around a little bit here to give the yarn access to the dye even while it is uneven. I have not added a bunch of acid in here yet, but I think I will add acid into here to add the rest of that color. I'm now coming in with the other 1.5 grams of dye, but I also added to this liter 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. And I'm slowly and relatively evenly pouring it across. I'm gonna go rinse this. There we go. Now, all of a sudden, we have a lot more volume in here. And there'll still be some unevenness with how these colors strike. You can see, I'm gonna try not to move it too much, but there's some blues that I see just from existing without, and just the way we've poured things on and the vinegar in there and how colors have started to strike. Now, I'm gonna turn on the heat. 3 tablespoons of vinegar isn't a lot given the massive volume of water in here. In general, I add acid based on the water volume, not the weight of yarn, because it's the final concentration that really ends up making a difference. But just to peek, you can see how this color has shifted. And was this our, yep, this may have been our white one already. And we're getting these gorgeous, gorgeous deep teals. There's a lot of color in here still to absorb, and I think we should end up with hopefully a fun and bright variegated yarn with pops of color. At least that's the goal. So heat's on. Gonna slowly heat this up, and let's check back in 30 minutes. Things are still heating up, but it's been a while since I've used this forest green color, and I think in my head it was less teal, and so I'm now wondering about that second like teal layer, if that was a good call or if it is going to be something that's going to feel fairly negligible. But either way, this is way more saturated, and maybe it's also just looking super teal because of that blue underlayer. But either way, I love this color, so I'm not mad about it. And you know, anyway, back to waiting. But just wanted to comment on that. And for reference, this is what our yarn looked like before this layer. So we've got the subtle teal and blue, and then this deeper color. So I think that we'll still have some fun pops of color in here. It has only been about 20 minutes, but the color has absorbed. I mean, in total, we added less than a 1% depth of shade of equivalent of that last color. 3 grams, so about a 0.6% DOS. Now granted, there are more colors underneath, but this is cool, and we've got some nice variation and tone in here. I am excited. All right, I am going to turn off the heat and leave this in here to cool for a little while. It's all fairly connected, and I want to be able to remove it safely without risking burning myself or anything. And so it'll be exposed to more heat for at least, 20 minutes longer. And then I'll go ahead and dye the second round off camera. The pan has cooled off pretty completely, and we've got some dirt. Ooh, look at that pop of blue. We've got some deep and medium teals, and I can tell the white one. Ooh, we still got some white in there. So I'm now going to remove this, and I'm going to go, I think, dump the water from the steam pan so we can open this up and see what all the yarn looks like. All right, let's place our interconnected web of yarn back in here. Thankfully, ooh, this is why doing resists is so much fun. This isn't even the point around that zip tie, but let's remove this zip tie. You could do this with yarn or something, but I find these removable nylon zip ties work super well, and then you can reuse them over and over again. There is our bright blue, but you can see from the resist that where it was mostly on the outside, we have just that thin section of color. And then on the inside, probably same over here, yep, on the inside it's bigger because when your yarn is clumped, this area here in the middle doesn't get as much access to the dye. All right, let's see where else we got. Okay. Sometimes I find it helpful to sort of just, if I can just press a little bit to loosen it a tiny bit, then it makes it easier to remove. But I'm gonna have to pay attention to the ones that I want to remove versus the ones that are in here, making sure everything doesn't get too messed up. But this is so pretty. And now let's do this one, which had some of that original blue in here. And I would say that this skein is really pretty. I don't know. Okay, so I'm not sure how much on camera, especially with the lighting being weird here, you'll be able to tell the difference between these light areas that are more teal versus the bright blue, but this colorway is really fun. All right, and let's keep going. The small differences between these various colorways will be a lot more obvious once the yarn is dry. Sometimes things that are really, really subtle can be hard to distinguish when wet, but I am really, really excited with these various teal shades with these pops of blue. Yes, in my head, I had something a lot more green than teal in mind, but I love this color and I'm happy. Okay, so when looking at our white skein, the difference between the color where it was white versus where there was some teal I covered up is really subtle. But there is technically a difference. Like this is more blue and that is more green, which makes sense because of the colors. And I think that this is really, really fun. All right, let's go wash this yarn and we'll take a final look at these colorways once everything is dry. Some of the comparisons will be a little hard to tell, like where was our first resist versus the second resist, since that color difference was so subtle. Nevertheless, worth it. I love this colorway. All right, let's wash this yarn. Yeah, the difference between that blue, the teal here with that blue underlayer and without is fairly striking. I'm really, really glad I did that cool vat with the blue. I think that the pops are really, really fun. And it lets these pops be, there's still an element of randomness to it because the size of that pop of color varies based on where it is located in the skein, or sorry, within the resist, but you can have slightly more regular placement. I'm adding some soap now. This regular placement isn't enough for you to do something with like planned cooling or something like that, but it is enough so that you can control having that color behind versus maybe having it overtaken by the darker color and getting really nice coverage. Now, I did some things here to intentionally not get perfect coverage of our deepest color all over. I wanted tonal variation in that, but we've preserved these bright pops. And that was our goal. And I am not seeing any color bleeding, so I'm gonna go ahead and rinse out the soap, finish up the second batch, hang everything up to dry, and we'll come back for some conclusions. Here is the finished dry yarn. I think where we started with our bright, almost neon frozen blue base, it's really, really difficult to see the effect of that second teal. The place where you can see that more, I believe, is on this bonus skein, where there are parts that are a bit bluer in here. And so from some of the resist, you can see some of this more blue teal and then the deeper, more green area. And you see that in various patches. And I'm gonna go ahead, it's a little disordered, I'm gonna go ahead and snap this, which sort of arranges that and cleans it up a little bit. Now, you do see some difference in tone around the resist areas where there is some brighter blue and then a little bit more teal blue, but the differences are super, super subtle. So maybe if I was doing this again, I would pick a green for that second step that had much more of a contrast with our blue. Right here we have 2 DK and 2 fingering weight skeins. And I think that you can tell that there are definitely differences between them, both in the number of resist points and their relative placement. And I talked about this when I was opening things up, but there are definitely going to be regions where the ties were more towards the outside where you can see that thin brightness. And then as you flip it, I guess this one isn't that extreme, it gets bigger. Let me see if I can find a better example. Okay, well, here we go. It's no longer in a line, but you can see that thin color. And then it's much wider on the other side. I think I probably showed that better once I was removing the resists from the yarn. But my point is that these colorways aren't going to be perfectly repeating or perfectly pooling. There are going to be some differences around it, but I think that it also might not be perfectly random, so you could end up with some pooling, but I think that the color is fun, and this is a really great way to make sure you can maintain small pops of bright across an overall darker base. You could achieve similar types of effects with hand painting, but you run the risk of losing the bright pops, of maybe the colors spreading too far, and then you end up with a lot more control and precision over the colorway, which can be fine if that's what you want. But I enjoy the randomly connecting everything together in the pan feel. This next part isn't exactly a regret, but I do sort of wish I'd pumped up the amount of that forest green a little more, so there could be even more contrast between them. Don't get me wrong, I think that this colorway is stunning, but imagine if I had used this green at this level for round 2, and then even with the same color, but quadrupled the concentration to make it that much more saturated for the next round. That could have been really, really cool and given a more like light and dark effect. But overall, I think that the amount of saturation we see is actually pretty consistent. But actually, we can test that. If I pop the camera just into its default black and white, you definitely see the tonal nature in here, and that we've got lighter patches and darker patches. So the blue is lighter, it's brighter, but we could have had a much more extreme difference in here under some circumstances. But I don't know. It's fun sometimes to take a look at the yarn in black and white to really see, get a sense of some of those levels of the depth of some of the colors. There is one more big step that I have to do, and that is wind this yarn into 10-gram mini, well actually I guess micro skeins for the 2020 ChemKnits Chanukah samplers. This is something that I don't think I'm going to include what those minis look like in this video, but I will share some of that in the vlog that will come out after the last night of Hanukkah. I don't remember how much I will be including in the vlog, but here is my mini skein from Hanukkah night 5, all twisted up. And you can see that reskeined, the colors are definitely more blended together, which can make it a little harder to tell what kind of technique you used to dye the yarn. Generally, I am team leave the yarn as it was dyed because I like to be able to open it up and see how regular the repeats are, how they're placed, and things like that. But if you need to turn a whole skein into mini skeins, it's going to need to be reskeined. So I hope that a view of this is really helpful to all of you as well. In tonight's video, you could really watch our project evolve as I adapted and made decisions based on the materials and colors I was working with and how things seemed to come together. I really hope you enjoyed hearing sort of my thoughts as I questioned decisions or maybe would have made different decisions as I went through. But ultimately, the yarn we created is absolutely stunning. And so I'm really excited to explore more resists in the future. It's something that has been a technique that has created some of my absolute favorite colorways in 2020, and so who knows what we'll create in 2021. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. Hanukkah is a little bit out of the ordinary because each night of Hanukkah we will have a new dyeing video at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But generally, I publish at least 2 videos a week, and you don't want to miss anything, so smash that bell icon to make sure your notifications are on so you never miss a video. If you've missed the night of Hanukkah so far, there is a playlist with all the videos. You can find that down in the video description. And if you've been a fan of the content here for a while and want to learn more about how you can support everything I'm doing here, I do have a Patreon. Patrons can get some really cool perks like shout outs and videos, behind the scenes sneak peeks, and more. You can find all of the details on Patreon. Now, there is a slight theme with the colorways this Chanukah. Have you figured it out yet? Let me know what you think it is I'm playing off of down below in the comments. Night 5 was a lot of fun, but night 6 is also going to be really awesome. And as a little sneak peek, there's a little bit of a throwback moment to it. So stay tuned and we'll see you tomorrow night on the 6th night of Chanukah. Bye everyone!